My dear brothers and sisters, there are moments in life when heaven seems quiet, when your prayers echo back to you with no reply, when every door you knock upon remains closed. You cry out, "God, where are you?" And all you hear is silence. But let me tell you today that silence is not absence. When God is silent, He is not still. He is working behind the curtain of your circumstance, arranging what you cannot see, preparing what you cannot yet handle, shaping the miracle that will come at the appointed time. Faith is not proven when God speaks. Faith is proven when God is silent. In those quiet, lonely nights of unanswered prayer, God is building your strength, teaching you to walk by faith and not by sight. And when the time is right, the same silence that once frightened you will become the testimony that strengthens others. There are seasons in every believer's life when heaven seems closed, when prayers rise, but no answer comes, when silence echoes louder than any word we could bear. In those moments, doubt begins to whisper, "Has God forgotten me? Has He turned away?" Yet it is in that very silence that the deepest work of God is often being done. The silence of God is not the absence of God. It is His hidden workshop, where He is shaping the unseen, preparing the miracle, and building faith that will not be shaken by sight. Many people mistake silence for rejection, but silence is not rejection, it is refinement. God uses silence to draw us deeper into dependence, to strip away the noise of the world and make our hearts sensitive to His still small voice. Think of Joseph in the pit, then in prison. For years, heaven seemed quiet. No visions, no words, no rescue. But God was moving pieces on the board of destiny. He was aligning Pharaoh's dreams, preparing the moment when Joseph's name would be called. The silence was not delay, it was design. So often we are eager to see the result, but God is more concerned with the root. He allows the silence to strengthen our spiritual muscles, to turn faith from a concept into a conviction. When you can trust God in silence, you will trust Him in storms. The seed does not hear the gardener's voice while buried in the dark soil, yet beneath that quiet a miracle is unfolding. The seed breaks, roots form, life begins. The silence of soil is not death, it is transformation. So it is with you. When you feel buried, God is not punishing you, He is planting you. He is developing in you what will one day bear fruit in abundance. Sometimes God hides His hand so that you will learn to seek His heart. Sometimes He withdraws the feeling of His presence so that your faith may rest not on emotion but on truth. Do not confuse divine stillness with divine absence. Even when you cannot see Him, He is orchestrating your deliverance. Even when you cannot hear Him, He is speaking through circumstances, aligning hearts, moving mountains behind the curtain. When God is silent, it is because the story is not finished yet. Think of Jesus before Lazarus' tomb. He delayed intentionally. Mary and Martha cried, "Lord, if you had been here, our brother would not have died." To them it seemed like silence, but Jesus was waiting for the greater glory. The silence was setting the stage for resurrection. There are times when God's delay is not denial but divine strategy. He allows what looks like death to introduce a greater manifestation of His power. Your unanswered prayer might be the seed of a greater miracle. Sometimes God waits because He is preparing a testimony that will touch generations when the heavens are silent. Do not stop praying. Do not stop believing. Do not stop expecting. God's silence is often the prelude to His strongest move. He works in shadows to display His light more gloriously. Every saint who ever walked in faith knew the silence of God. Abraham waiting for the promised son, Hannah weeping in the temple. Elijah hearing not in the wind or the fire, but in the whisper. The silence is not the end of the conversation. It is an invitation to deeper trust. When your heart is weary and the heavens feel quiet, lift your eyes and know this. Silence is the canvas upon which God paints His greatest works. He is never still, even when He seems silent. His delays are deliberate, His quietness full of purpose. The same God who seemed silent on Saturday was resurrecting victory on Sunday. When God is silent, He is not testing your patience. He is testing your faith's depth and maturity. Many believers can worship when prayers are answered, when doors open, when miracles flow, but true faith is proven in silence, when you have no sign to hold on to except His promise. In those moments, God observes not your words, but your posture. He watches if you will still lift your hands in worship when you do not feel His touch, if you will still walk in obedience when no miracle appears. The silence is not to punish you, it is to purify you. It reveals what your faith is built upon: emotion or conviction, blessings or belief, outcomes or relationship. The maturity of faith is seen when you stand firm, even when heaven gives no reply. Remember Abraham, waiting year after year for the promised son, with nothing but a word to hold on to. His faith was not built on constant reassurance. It was anchored in trust that God cannot lie. So God allowed time to stretch his soul, silence to refine his confidence, and impossibility to magnify his glory. Mature faith does not demand signs. It rests on the integrity of God's character. When God is silent, He is shaping that kind of faith within you. Many cry out, "Lord, speak to me," but they do not realize that sometimes God speaks through silence. He uses it to mature your spiritual hearing, to teach you to discern His presence without noise, to grow roots that reach deeper when the surface is dry. If you only trust God when you feel Him, your faith will always be fragile. But when you learn to trust Him even when He hides His face, your faith becomes unshakable, like a tree that stands strong during drought because its roots go deep into unseen waters. So your faith must grow beyond feelings into the foundation of truth. Silence is the furnace where shallow faith burns away and true faith is refined. In the school of silence, God trains your heart to depend not on circumstances, but on His covenant. It is where self-confidence dies and God-confidence rises. He removes every crutch, every comfort, every familiar voice, so that your soul may learn to rest on Him alone. That is why sometimes the more you pray, the quieter heaven becomes. It is not because God has left you. It is because He wants you to outgrow the need for constant affirmation. He wants your faith to mature from "I believe because I see" to "I believe because He said." When Job sat in the ashes, heaven seemed mute. No angel appeared, no voice thundered, no miracle broke the pain. Yet God was watching, measuring the strength of a faith that refused to curse Him. When everything is stripped away, health, wealth, reputation, what remains is the essence of your trust. God's silence exposes what your faith is truly built upon. Will you still love Him when you do not understand Him? Will you still serve Him when the answer is delayed? This is the question heaven asks in silence. Mature faith does not crumble under divine quietness. It grows stronger because of it. God does not always speak to reassure you. Sometimes He remains silent to promote you. The silence of one season is often the preparation for a new dimension of calling. When you feel the silence pressing heavy on your heart, do not despair. It means God trusts you enough to endure it. The teacher is always silent during the test. But that silence does not mean he has left the classroom. He is watching, waiting for you to prove what you have learned. So when you pray and heaven does not echo, do not quit. Keep sowing, keep praising, keep trusting. That silence is your spiritual exam. Pass it with faith and promotion will follow, for the silence of God is not evidence of His absence. It is a divine classroom where faith matures, trust deepens, and the soul grows into the likeness of Christ. When God is silent, He is not ignoring your prayer. He is redirecting your focus from what you want to who He is. In the noise of need, we often come to God with lists, desires, and deadlines. But in His silence, He gently teaches us that faith is not about getting what we want. It's about knowing who we trust. God's silence strips away the distractions of outcome-based faith. It shifts your gaze from the blessing to the blesser, from the miracle to the miracle worker. You begin to realize that the greatest reward of prayer is not the answer. It's His presence. Many people pray because they want something from God. Mature believers continue praying even when they receive nothing, because they have fallen in love with the one they are praying to. That's what God's silence does. It transforms your motivation, purifies your devotion, and deepens your intimacy with Him. When God withholds an answer, it is often to reveal himself in a greater way than your request ever could. Think about Moses on Mount Sinai. He waited 6 days before God even spoke. 6 days of silence, 6 days of waiting in the cloud. Yet in that silence, Moses was being drawn into the holiness of God's presence, learning to desire not the words of God, but God himself. When the silence ended, it was not just a message that Moses received. It was revelation, glory, and communion. God's silence is not a void. It is a call into deeper relationship. It teaches your spirit to seek him for who he is, not just for what he can do. When you no longer need constant confirmation, when you can say, Lord, even if you don't speak, I will still stay, then you have entered into a deeper faith. One rooted not in results, but in relationship. Many believers mistake silence as distance, but silence can be God's invitation to come closer. When he stops speaking loudly, he's calling you to listen quietly. He's training your heart to discern his whisper in the stillness. The Holy Spirit is often most active when the soul is most silent, when life is noisy and heaven seems quiet. It is then that God wants to teach you to hear with your heart, not your ears. You begin to sense his peace where there are no words, his nearness where there are no signs, his love where there is no response. God's silence becomes the language of intimacy. It draws you into worship without words, trust without evidence, love without condition. In silence, God shifts your perspective. He moves you from asking why to saying who. Not why is this happening, but who is in control. Not when will this end, but who holds the time. It's in that shift that you find rest, because when your focus is on who God is, his goodness, his faithfulness, his sovereignty, your soul finds peace even when your mind has no answers. The silence becomes sacred ground because it refines your sight. You stop chasing what's temporal and start longing for what's eternal. You begin to see that sometimes unanswered prayers are not punishments, they are protection. God withholds certain answers to preserve a greater blessing. His silence is not neglect, it is wisdom. He knows that some answers would destroy your dependence on him, so he keeps you close through silence. When Elijah stood on the mountain, he expected God in the wind, the earthquake, and the fire. But God was in none of those. Then came the still small voice. That moment teaches us that God often withdraws the dramatic to reveal the delicate. He removes the noise of the spectacular to teach the soul to recognize the supernatural in stillness. His silence refines your spiritual sight until you can see his hand even when he hides his face. So when you cry and no answer comes, when the heavens are quiet and your heart feels forgotten, lift your eyes, not to the promise but to the promiser. The silence is his way of saying, come closer, child. Stop searching for what I can give. Seek me. Because the miracle is not always in the answered prayer. It is in the transformation that happens while you wait. God's silence reshapes your faith from being need-driven to love-driven. It takes your eyes off the temporary and fixes them on the eternal. And when you finally understand that, the silence no longer feels empty. It feels holy. For it is there, in the quiet between prayers and answers, that you truly begin to know God for who he is, not just for what he does. Every silence of God conceals divine timing. What seems like delay to us is precision to him. Heaven's clock does not tick according to the urgency of our emotions, but according to the perfection of his purpose. We are creatures bound by time, desperate for now, but God moves outside of time, orchestrating eternity with absolute accuracy. When he seems silent, he is synchronizing your life with his plan. You see only the waiting room, but he sees the entire timeline. Every person, every event, every detail must align before his promise unfolds. God's timing is never rushed, never random, and never wrong. The silence is the space where he arranges what you cannot see, where he positions hearts, opens unseen doors, and prepares you to carry the very thing you are praying for. Many times we want the promise instantly, but God knows that premature blessings can become burdens. He will not release something that will destroy you. Before he gives you what you're praying for, he ensures you're ready to receive it. That's why sometimes silence is not denial. It's divine preparation. He delays not to withhold, but to develop. While you are waiting, he is working, Think of a master artist painting a masterpiece. Each brushstroke seems insignificant until the whole image appears. God's silence is like that. It feels incomplete until his timing reveals the full picture. When he finally speaks, everything makes sense. Look at the story of Abraham. God promised him a son, but years passed, and silence filled the space between the promise and the fulfillment. Abraham wondered, will God still do what he said? But behind the silence, God was aligning generations, preparing not just Isaac, but the entire lineage of faith. His promise to Abraham was not about one child. It was about a covenant that would bless nations. If Abraham had received Isaac immediately, he might have celebrated the child but missed the revelation of God's faithfulness. The delay revealed the depth of God's plan. In the same way, your waiting season is not wasted. It is woven into something larger than your moment. God's silence is not a pause of neglect. It is the rhythm of divine orchestration. Divine timing often feels late from a human perspective. Mary and Martha said to Jesus, "If you had been here, our brother would not have died." They saw death, Jesus saw resurrection. They saw delay, he saw divine timing. The silence of those 4 days in Bethany was not neglect, it was set up. God was preparing a greater glory, a testimony that would echo for centuries. The delay became the doorway to revelation. Every time God seems late, he is setting the stage for something beyond your expectation. What feels like silence is a holy pause before a divine unveiling. When God delays, he is not only preparing the miracle, he is preparing you. Sometimes he must build patience, strengthen character, deepen humility, and purify motives before he can trust you with what he's promised. Blessings without maturity can crush a soul. God's silence becomes the classroom of transformation, shaping you for the promise you will soon carry. Just as a diamond must endure pressure before it shines, your spirit must endure the silence before it sees the glory. If you rush the process, you miss the beauty that comes from divine timing. Consider Joseph once again, forgotten in prison after doing everything right. The silence of those years was not God's absence. It was the perfect alignment of destiny. Pharaoh's dream had not yet come. Egypt's famine had not yet begun. God waited until the appointed moment when one dream in a palace would unlock Joseph's purpose. Had Joseph been freed earlier, he might have returned home as a free man, but not as a ruler. God's silence held him until the world was ready for his assignment. That is how divine timing works. It connects purpose with perfect moments. Sometimes the silence is God protecting you from something you're not meant to step into yet. The door you want open might lead to a battle you're not equipped for. The person you want to meet might not be ready to walk alongside your destiny. The opportunity you're praying for might require a level of wisdom and strength you're still developing. God's silence guards you until you're ready. His not yet is mercy in disguise. He withholds not because he doesn't care, but because he cares too much to let you settle for less than his best. God's silence teaches you to trust his seasons. The farmer does not panic when the field looks empty. He knows the seed is growing in silence. In the same way, God's timing may look slow, but every delay has purpose. The seed must stay underground for a time. Otherwise, it cannot bear fruit. You may cry, pray, and wonder why heaven is so quiet, but one day you will see that the silence was the soil for your growth. It was there that God was developing endurance, faith, and trust that cannot be shaken by circumstances. We often say, God is never late, but the truth is deeper. He is never early either. He arrives precisely at the moment when his plan and your readiness meet. Think of Jesus, born not a day too soon or too late, but at the fullness of time. Even redemption had a divine schedule. The prophets waited centuries, but the silence between Malachi and Matthew, 400 years of quiet, was the preparation for the coming of the Messiah. The greatest move of God often follows the longest silence. So when you find yourself in the waiting, do not let impatience interpret silence as neglect. Do not measure God's care by his speed. The same God who made the stars move in order knows exactly when your miracle will appear. His timing will never fail. When he finally speaks, it will not be random. It will be right. When he moves, it will not be partial. It will be perfect. Every moment of silence will make sense in the light of his revelation. The pain of waiting will give birth to the joy of fulfillment, and you will realize that his silence was not a delay, but the preparation for divine timing to intersect with your destiny. So rest in the quiet. Trust the unseen hand that governs your days. While you are waiting, heaven is aligning. While you are weeping, God is working. While you are wondering, the angels are preparing. For every silence carries a schedule, every delay hides a design, and every unanswered prayer has an appointed time. And when that time comes, you will see that not a second of waiting was wasted. Because when God seems silent, he is actually synchronizing your life with his perfect timing. Every silence of God conceals divine timing. Nothing he does is accidental. Nothing he delays is meaningless. When God is silent, he is not idle. He is aligning, arranging, and adjusting things beyond the reach of your understanding. You see moments, but he sees the whole story. You live day by day, but he is the God who declares the end from the beginning. The silence between your prayer and his answer is not an empty space. It is the sacred interval where heaven prepares what your heart is not yet ready to handle. God's timing is the unseen architect of destiny. He never misses an appointment. The waiting may break your strength, but it builds your faith. The delay may stretch your patience, but it expands your capacity. What you call waiting, heaven calls weaving. God is intertwining his plan with your obedience, your tears with his wisdom, your confusion with his perfect order. Consider this. God works in seasons, and every season has its appointed purpose. A seed planted in winter cannot sprout until spring. No matter how much it rains or how fervently you pray, the seed must remain buried until the warmth of the season comes. In the same way, God hides his promises in silence until the appointed time. The waiting is not punishment, it is process. He is teaching you endurance, shaping your expectations, and refining your heart to trust not in outcomes but in his sovereignty. Sometimes you are not waiting for God. God is waiting for you, for your faith to mature, for your heart to align, for your spirit to be still enough to carry what he's preparing. His silence is not to frustrate you, but to form you. Think of Abraham again. God promised him a son, but years passed and nothing happened. The silence was long, the years heavy, yet every quiet day was part of divine timing. God waited until Abraham's body was as good as dead, until all human ability was exhausted. Why? Because divine timing reveals divine glory. When every possibility fades, God steps in, so no one can boast that human strength achieved it. The silence prepared the stage for a miracle that would be undeniably from heaven. So when your prayers echo unanswered, when time feels wasted, remember, delay is the disguise of divine timing. It's not about if he will act, but when, and his when is always the moment that magnifies his name the most. In silence, God is synchronizing events in ways you cannot see. Imagine the pieces of a puzzle. Each one scattered, unrelated, incomplete. God is fitting every piece together. People, places, opportunities, even setbacks. He moves hearts you've never met, opens doors in rooms you don't know exist, and shifts circumstances you thought were fixed. By the time the silence breaks, everything will have aligned so perfectly that you'll realize it could never have been random. Divine timing is often slow because perfection takes time. Look at the story of Joseph, from the pit to the prison. Silence surrounded him. Forgotten by his brothers, forgotten by the cupbearer, it seemed as though heaven had sealed its mouth. But God was not sleeping, he was scheduling. Pharaoh's dream had not yet come. Egypt's famine had not yet begun. The silence was the waiting room of destiny. When the right moment came, in a single day, Joseph went from prisoner to prime minister. That is how divine timing operates. Suddenly, after years of silence, God compresses time, turning delay into acceleration. The years that seem lost become the very foundation of your promotion. Sometimes, The silence is mercy in disguise. We want doors to open quickly, but God knows that premature success can destroy a soul not yet anchored in humility. The silence protects you from opportunities that could crush you. It delays connections that are not yet mature enough to bless you. It holds back blessings that would turn your focus from God to yourself. When God is silent, He is guarding your destiny from collapse. The waiting is a wall of protection. He is not saying no. He is saying not now because I love you too much to let you fall. The truth is, divine timing requires divine trust. Faith is not proven when God answers instantly. It is proven when you remain steadfast while heaven remains silent. Waiting becomes worship when you stop demanding answers and start resting in His sovereignty. Like a farmer who trusts the process of seasons, faith must rest in divine timing. The soil looks lifeless, but life is forming beneath it. Just because you cannot see progress does not mean God is not working. Every second of silence is pregnant with purpose. The delay is not a detour, it is direction. Even in Scripture, the greatest movements of God were preceded by long silence. Between the Old and New Testaments were 400 years of divine quiet. No prophets, no visions, no voices from heaven. Yet during that silence, God was preparing the world for the birth of the Messiah, aligning empires, languages, and cultures for the coming of Jesus. The longest silence preceded the greatest revelation. So if you feel that heaven has been silent for too long, rejoice. The depth of the silence often prophesies the greatness of the breakthrough. The darker the night, the nearer the dawn. God's silence also teaches spiritual timing. There are prayers that, if answered too soon, would cause harm. There are dreams that must die before they can truly live. Jesus waited 4 days to raise Lazarus, not because He didn't care, but because He wanted to reveal resurrection power. What the sisters called too late was actually right on time. Divine timing often feels like delay because our hearts cannot yet see what God is synchronizing. You are not being ignored. You are being prepared. The silence is heaven's whisper. Hold on. I'm aligning everything for your good. When God finally moves, it will be suddenly. But that suddenly will have been centuries in the making. One touch, one word, one open door, and the years of silence will melt into clarity. You will look back and say, now I understand. Every unanswered prayer, every tear, every quiet night had meaning. Divine timing will make sense of divine silence. So while you wait, don't fight the silence. Embrace it. Don't interpret delay as distance. Interpret it as design. God's timing never fails. The silence is His signature of precision, the space where He crafts the miracle that only He can complete. And when that moment finally comes, when heaven speaks again, you will know why He made you wait. Because He was not just preparing the promise, He was preparing you to carry it.